Well, welcome back everyone. We're getting started with the Hunter here from Claustrophobia 1643. I started with an all gray primer. Just made it pretty simple this time. Instead of doing a zenithal highlight, I figured I'll just highlight him and shadow him myself. Starting with some flat flesh from Vallejo model color, and we're going to paint. He has a lot of skin showing, his legs, arms, and his whole torso and back, so you're going to want to get really good coverage. And just to remember, you do not need to use products that say flesh in them or skin in them or something like that to do skin colors. You can make this really easily with a little bit of a tan color mixed with some orange and then some white in there until you get the right shade of like peach if you wanted to do this pale skin tone like this. The skin tone paints just make it a little bit easier. Probably the most important part is that you need really solid, even coverage. And because this is a Birdman demon, the next part I am painting his feet in a yellow, like like bird's feet. So I'm painting with a pale yellow. And then we're going to let this dry really well before we come back to attack the second coat of it. You want to get a solid, even coat. I'm using some of my white sand texture paste that I really like to do bases with. And as you can see, I broke the model off of the base. Probably a bad idea. I don't think I would have done this if I had the chance to do it again. I kept rubbing paint off of the model because there was nowhere to hold him. It did make making the base a lot easier, but it's still better just to leave them on and work around it. But, let me know in the comments down below what preferred tool you like to use for doing basing, because a brush just sort of makes these peaks and it takes forever. Using my finger, leaves fingerprints in it and doesn't really even out the way that I want it to. And I end up spending a ton of time just trying to get it smooth. So let me know, what type of tool do you like to use, or do you just fuss with a brush the entire time? So I got these little crystals from Green Stuff World. If you go to Green Stuff World, they have colored ones, they have clear ones. I got the clear ones, and I'm coloring them with Carroburg Crimson. In the game, in Claustrophobia, you use these red stones that are basically the whole reason the humans are in the underworld. It's the things that the demons use to buy more demons and actually control their actions. So I thought it'd be nice to put them on the demon's board or on the demon's base as if he was protecting them. So the hunter has them behind him and in front of him. Here I am. I let it dry, and I'm just sort of, positioning him with my eyes to make sure that he's not going to hit those after they've dried in place. Now I'm using the same colors as before, nothing different. I'm using the flat flesh and I'm using the light yellow, and I'm going to wet blend them together. So putting down a solid base coat first before you do the wet blending is very important, or else you run the risk of having tons of streaks that just show the white primer or the gray primer underneath. It's even worse if you are doing this on top of a black primer. But the way that you do it is you put down a fresh brush of each color, then use a clean brush with just a little bit of water, very little bit. You don't want it to make any of the paints run, and then you move back and forth and you blend them together. That's why it's called wet blending. Just make sure your paints stay wet. If you are finding it really troublesome to try to blend them together, add a little bit more water. You can also get mediums, like glaze mediums, to help them work. I'm now using the flesh wash on all of the flesh. Use your favorite one. I only own the washes from GW, so those are the ones that I use, but they're not necessary. I covered all of the skin and the base. I keep saying the base when I mean the feet. I apologize. So now, how to get good skin? Well, this is takes a really, really long time to get this right, and I know. It's frustrating to get skin to look right. I feel like this is probably the best skin I've ever done on any model. And here's my best advice, what I learned. Take it very, very slow. Spend time with it. Do not rush anything about doing the skin. Really pay attention to where the muscles are bulging versus where the muscles are just sort of laying, you know, naturally where they're supposed to be. And let your wash do most of the work for the shade. You know, you started with the base color, you throw the shade on, now you come back with the base color. Make sure your paints are thin. Do it slowly and build up layer after layer. If you put one layer on and it already looks like you have perfect coverage, your paint is too thick. I probably went about 3 layers here before I then added some of this highlight skin in and started going back with another layer. So you can see that it doesn't look like much as you're looking at right now. But I'm now going to do this highlight skin layer, 1 or 2 layers, and try to build that up so that I have even paler, pastier skin. And I'm being very careful and very precise with where I want it to be. Don't be afraid to mess up. That's not the important part. You're going to mess up if you go fast. You're going to mess up if you, don't care and you just slop paint on there. You're not going to mess up if you try really, really hard. Sure, you might not make it the greatest painting you've ever done. Not the point. The point is that if you take it slow, if you're precise, if you're meaningful with where you place your highlights, it will come out really, really well. And I was super happy with how this came out just because I took the time. The rest of this model is so easy, so quick. The skin is there's more skin on this guy than anything else, than any other particular element. So take your time with it. And that's my final highlight there. Now you can see how bright I got with that skin. And when you get the other layers around it, when I do the cloth wraps, when he has his feathers, when he has his beak all done, when he has his loincloth done, that's when you're really going to see how much the skin pops and how good those highlights and those shadows look. So I'm back with the pale yellow, basically doing the exact same thing to the feet that we did with the skin. Using lemon yellow here, which is a really bright yellow, and hopefully offset some of that orange. And I'm doing it in just little streaks because bird feet, are very different than human skin and human feet. So you want to make sure that you're doing it in like little tiny streaks. He has talons on his feet. They aren't nails. Well, I mean, they sort of look like nails, right? But they're talons because he's a bird and they're bird feet. So I painted them in black. And I'm just going to highlight them as we normally do with black. We'll hit up just the peaks and ridges with some Mechanicus standard gray. And if you want, you can then go another layer on top of that with some white to really make them, shine and glow as if they're really, really sharp and ready to just tear somebody apart. Next we have Umbral Umber. Here is mistake number 2. Mistake number 1 was taking him off of his base. Mistake number 2 is using a brush that is that fat and ruined to try to paint anything on this model. This was stupid. I should have used a better brush. Don't use a brush like this to paint intricate details on a model. Learn from my mistakes. So then here is mistake number 3. You see how I'm trying to paint the black on there and it's not running at all into the crevices. It's just dry. That's a clear sign that your paint is not wet enough. Now look, as I added more water to the paint, mixed it up again, now it's covering everything evenly. It's flowing off of the brush with no problem. It looks like I have way more on the brush, but that's not it. It's that the brush is able to suck up way more really quickly because the paint is much thinner. So you see up there, I've got the feathers are all very, very solid. Now this is the first kind of tricky part. Everything up to here, you were able to be slightly sloppy. Not that you're going to want to be sloppy, but you could be without really causing any problems. Here we're taking Khaki and we're going to paint all of the netting that is on his back and the wraps that are around his legs and around his feet. You're going to follow up with some Ivory. We're going to make them look like cloth wraps. I was kind of tired of painting leather. I painted so much leather with Zombicide Green Horde and so much leather on Hate. I'm still painting leather after leather after leather, that I wanted to do something a little bit different. So I went with cloth. I think it actually looks pretty good, because we already have kind of the leather loincloth. It kind of balances out. Umbral Umber again. Now this is a great spot to use that big fat gross brush, is when you're doing basing. And I'm doing that again here with the Umbral Umber and painting the entire base. Now you'll also see that I'm jumping around a lot in how I paint this. This is how I painted it. That's why I recorded it in this order. This is just chronological. But it always has to do with what I let dry a little bit longer versus what I don't let dry. So I needed the base to dry for a really long time, because that sand, that grit mixture that I put on there takes about, I would say about 6 hours to dry solidly. Here I am dry brushing an orange and Umbral Umber mixture, and then I'm going back over with a little bit more orange, and then I'll do a final orange with a little bit of white mixed in and just do some highlights. And you just do it lighter each time. Dry brushing, you just want to make sure that you don't have too much water on your brush, too much paint on your brush, and be very thin about it. Here's another example of dry brushing. I'm now dry brushing German Gray on the black on his back. Be very careful. You have to have very little paint on your brush. Number one, you don't want a ton of it on the miniature. Number two, you don't want to have paint fling all over the model. So now we're doing Mechanicus Standard Gray, and this is a very light dry brush just to pick out the top peaks. And we're going to do one final one after this of just the absolute peaks, just to get as much highlight and variance on these feathers as we can. So this is Wolf Gray, which is the lightest color we're going to go to. Now we're going to flip the model upside down and start working on his beak. And in the game, his beak is like bone colored. It looks almost like it might be a mask. I thought it would be cooler to actually try to make him look like a real bird. And I picked a toucan because why not? I mean, you could pick a bird of paradise, you could pick so many different birds, but go look at, pictures of birds and look at their face and give yourself some inspiration of what to do. Or you can follow what I'm doing. I use Scarlet Red. Now I'm using flat red here, which I'm going to wet blend with the Scarlet Red. In a minute, whenever I do it, I'm going to hit the camera first. And then here we go with some wet blending to blend together that Scarlet Red and the flat red, just to make it a smooth transition between the two. And you don't even have to do it that much because it's going from an extreme shadow to, being on the side of his face, which is, being lit. So you don't have to wet blend too much. And then what I was looking at in Toucan bills is that it goes, from a very deep red to a bright orange on the bottom bill, and then the top bill is almost entirely yellow. So I'm kind of rounding out the top of this with some hot orange, and then wet blending a bit of that hot orange as well right back into it. And then finally we're going to use some pale yellow all across the top. And I went back and forth between if I wanted to do sun yellow or if I wanted to do pale yellow, and I went with pale yellow. I think the sun yellow would have been just too bright and maybe look a little fake and a little like a kind of like a toy. I wanted it to look realistic, and what I don't show you is I'm going to do a wash here, and I will show the wash, but the important part was that I actually went back and re-highlighted the very top with this pale yellow again, and then edge highlighted with some white. So I don't show you that, I'm sorry, but just so you know, you can go back and re-highlight any of the places that you feel this wash is too thick. Make sure that you do not make this wash thick. This wash is meant to kind of bring all of those blends together and make them look like one unified color here. Now we're going flat brown to highlight up the cloth, the leather loincloth that he has. This is simple. If you've been painting for a while, you definitely know what you're doing here. Just picking out those raised edges and trying to bring everything together. You're just highlighting up. We're in the home stretch now. Everything's a little simple. Now that all of that has dried, and you can see the highlights in there. You can see the highlights on the side of the face, and you can see the highlights at the very tip of the horn. I'm coming in with some black ink, and the reason I use black ink is it's so smooth and it works so well. You can basically draw on your miniature with that. And toucans have a big black spot right at the front, so I just made a black spot on each side right at the front there. Now I mixed Ivory into that flat brown, and I'm coming back and highlighting the rest of his loincloth with that Ivory and flat brown mixture. Just making sure we have some really good definition and some really good contrast between the deep dark areas that are shadow and the bright highlight areas. Now he has some bones that are tied in his hair, or in his feathers. So I picked them first out with flat brown to give them kind of a shadow, because I don't want to wash them to create a shadow. Normally I do bones by starting a little bit lighter and then washing them and then highlighting. This one I'm just going to start with a really dark color and then go with a bright color right on top of it to make it look like it's been washed. And that's what I'm doing here. I'm using Ivory right over top of all of the flat brown bones. And then we're going to hit it one last time with white. And this is just going to be used very sparingly. Not even on all of them, just the ones that are easiest to see, and just towards the tips and the end. Last two things we're going to do, I'm using some gold, some Vallejo model colored gold to do his bracelets that are on his arm. And then he also has a chain going around his neck that looks like it's also kind of like earrings. Right up there behind his beak. It's a little hard to see what exactly is going on there, but I just painted them all in gold and then used some Agrax Earthshade to shade them in. And that's basically it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below, and definitely like the video if you want to see some more Claustrophobia 1643. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and I don't know, tell me what you want to see next. It's been a little while since I've made a video. I've got quite a few in the pipeline. They're already recorded and they're ready to come out. They'll be coming out very, very soon. But do you want to see more Claustrophobia? Do you want to see another game? You can even ask me my opinions on games. You know, I'm here. I answer all the comments every time I see them. But thank you so much for watching. Like the video, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.